Welcome to the series on BlueWorx, a leading solution to mobilise your SAP Plant Maintenance operations. I'm Craig Bennett and I work for ZAG as their Product Development Manager. ZAG has been successfully selling, implementing and supporting our customers using SAP for over 20 years. Today, ZAG has over 80 customers in New Zealand and Australia, and we support BlueWorx customers globally. BlueWorx is a world-class solution. It includes many innovations designed to help you achieve meaningful business value. In this video series, we'll set out to provide you with insights into it. We'll demonstrate its ease of use, versatility, and the unprecedented width and depth of its functionality. I hope you find value in this and the other videos, not just in terms of BlueWorx, but also in providing you insights into some of the concepts, challenges, and approaches to mobilising your SAP asset management. If you have any questions about BlueWorx and how it might be applied to your operations, then please get in touch. In this video, we do a deep dive into inspection functionality in BlueWorx. We will start with a general introduction about asset inspections in SAP, common business challenges we've seen, and how we've overcome these. We will then cover off concepts in our inspection solution to provide you with a good understanding of how it works. Inspection demonstrations in BlueWorx and a deep dive into the business configuration will be covered off in other videos. There's a lot of different inspection types that happen in the real world that need to be reflected back into SAP. And there's various drivers for that, be they normal maintenance routine or regulatory authority requirements, or just general operational needs. In a SAP plant maintenance world, you can drive a lot of things off an inspection. You may create measurement documents. That's quite a common process. You may have an update to equipment or functional location master data or classification data. If you find something that needs correction, then you could create notifications. And also there's the general status of the inspection through the signalling of completion of an order or operation where you have directed somebody to undertake an inspection. So the functionality around PM and QM doesn't really allow for real world actions to flow seamlessly into the plant maintenance process workflows. In a regular maintenance world, inspections are often carried out using forms, either paper or electronic, in non-SAP systems. And these are then processed into SAP or not, or sometimes they are and sometimes they're not, or some business areas do and some don't. I guess the bottom line is there's always been a lot of scope for improvement, and that's what we've done with BlueWorx. So the challenges that there has always been is that because you're using external systems or paper, then any results that are gathered need to be updated into SAP. And there's often a time gap between the gathering of that information and the entry. And if you've got time critical things that need update, then that can be a problem for you. There's no strict controls on a form. You can try your best to put boxes and check boxes and everything else, but that control is basically down to pen and paper. Or you've got an electronic form, but it's not tied directly into SAP, so that there's not a finesse of controls over what the allowed values are for a given asset and a response to an inspection. There's no easy way to enforce that an inspection got done. You can raise a work order and you can tell somebody to do something, but you can't actually track what they did. And so that leads to increasingly complicated either multi-line operations in an order or lots of text, or the reliance on paper forms. But there's a bit of a disconnect between whether the paper inspection or the external inspection actually got done or not. So entries in paper-based inspections can require interpretation. There's common use of symbology to do that. And the layout of them is often different, with different people crafting forms in a different way. And that puts an expectation on the operators that they need to understand the visual layout of what it is that they're answering, which leads to a training overhead and can also lead to the integrity of their answers being challenged if they're not really understanding what they're doing. Or, for example, having to use very small font in the printing of the form to fit in a whole heap of information. Unless the external system is deeply integrated into SAP or is printed specifically for an asset, the personnel can't see previous results for an inspection or the existing values if they're going for a correction on something. And the auditing of records can be challenging. If you've got a paper-based system, then you've got to file it, you've got to be able to bring it back again. Similarly, if you're using an external to SAP system, you've somehow got to link it and make sure that the two are aligned all the time. We often see with customers the adoption of a SAP standard approach, if you like, to gathering inspection data can just mean creating a whole lot of measurement points in order for you to be able to have some place to put your responses back into SAP when those responses are not necessarily what we would all deem to be normal uses of measurement points. And reporting on records can be challenging because it's not inside of SAP, or it is, but it's in paper-based format. So that leads to a number of things. You've got costs associated with using other systems and the actual resource costs and filling out forms and getting them all back in again, and sometimes retyping the results. Because there's a gap between gathering and processing, there's data currency issues. If you're driving maintenance off gathered data, there can be a time lag there. The integrity, especially in paper-based forms, is challenged. But even in electronic forms, if they're not very tightly integrated through to SAP, then you can gather in invalid responses for a particular asset. It's hard to enforce compliance because you can't see, management can't know that everything has been done in accordance with the regulations, or easily know. As I already touched on, that can lead to operator complexity in terms of training, in terms of having the right form and opening it up on maybe on a phone when it's designed for a tablet, for example. And because those other systems, and because paper-based forms are quite complicated, or can be quite complicated to maintain, and definitely complicated to integrate if they're external, then that means that it's slow and sometimes expensive to adapt and to change. Poor cause analysis, especially if you're going from a paper-based format. If you're using SAP Business Objects or other analytics, then trying to run the rule across an entire data set is very, very difficult. And if you're using a whole heap of measurement points to gather this in, as I already touched on, that can create a whole lot of unnecessary SAP records that may record a result but don't really sit nicely in the context of what measurement points are normally for. And underlying all of that, there's a lot of administrative complexity. So our approach to inspections is that we've created inspections as an integral part of what BlueWorx does. So you configure everything inside the SAP system and using BlueWorx admin. That tightly controls what it is that you're seeing and tightly controls what it is that users are inspecting. The inspections can be applied to work orders or assets automatically, and in the case of work orders, they can be made compulsory. So in standard BlueWorx, you can have a work order, it can have one or more inspections, and the operator cannot complete the order without having completed all the compulsory inspections. That helps with compliance. Now, yes, you can say you didn't find the asset, but it's the exception, not the rule, and that's catered for in the solution as well. One of the other things is that lengthy inspections with cooperation can be responded to by more than one inspector. So we have customers that do that, where if you've got potentially many hundreds of questions against a complex asset, then you can have different people completing different sections, as I said, with cooperation and coordination. The results are all stored back in SAP. So you've got a good basis to go and do other analysis, and from a compliance perspective, you've got it in a system that you control and that you trust. So there is no external system and there's no paper. The results are processed in SAP automatically, and that means that your data currency from inspection results is as good as you can expect, and that any errors in processing are also visible to administrators. So if you ask a question and offer some results that don't marry up with whatever you've set up, for example, for classification data, then the administrators can go and see those and respond to them and correct them. And we can use rules to influence the questions within an inspection and whether they're visible or compulsory or hidden. So you can tune an inspection based upon potentially something about the asset, some of its equipment master or data or classification data, or based upon the order type, or based upon responses that the inspector has made in a previous question. All the text values that we have are translatable, so that means you can have multi-language inspections being run. So that leads to there's just one source of truth, and that can be right across the organisation. There is no double handling. The operator completes the inspection, and depending on when you elect to process it, it happens soon after they've synced with SAP and with high integrity of the data that's coming across. That gives you a better assurance, and because you've set up the configuration and you've got checks on whether you can complete orders, and you're checking to see that orders are complete, that you've got a high degree of compliance. It allows you to shift and change quite quickly. So if you have an inspection and it's found that there's an improvement that's needed to it, it doesn't mean that you have to go through hundreds of task lists to go and update the details of a new or change of question. You can configure it, test it, and then push it out very, very quickly. It's auditable. You can come in, you can see exactly what the user was asked, when they were asked, what their response was, and that snapshot. So if you then later go and change a question, the snapshot of what they were asked at the time is kept within the SAP system. All that leads to a simplified user experience, because the user just has to follow a list. They don't need to know that they're answering a question that relates to a measurement point, or that it's going to go and update a classification value within an equipment master. They just get asked a question, get given the options to respond appropriately, and answer it and move on. No SAP knowledge to any large degree is required. And the administration is simplified based upon all of that. So some of the challenges that we saw when we were going through and designing this and delivering it over a period, all of these challenges weren't met in the first release, but certainly we've got a mature product now. So the first one is that we needed to support multiple form factors. And by that I mean the screen size and the shape. And what might work for example, in a Word document where you've got a letter or an A4 page size is obviously not going to work when you try and scale that down to a phone, or you go the other way, scale out to a desktop. So we've chosen to expose each question in detail from a list, and then navigate to the next question or back to the list, so that the focus of the operator is on the question that they're attempting, and that means that it's consistent between all forms of the device, whether they be phone, tablet, or even back on a desktop. The next challenge is we need to support offline use, and the technology that we use supports that. So we take all the data that you need offline for the inspections, although when an operator is online, so they have a connection back to SAP, they can also look at previous inspection history. We need to allow inspections at different levels. So basically, I'll explain this in some more detail, but we need to be very precise at one end about what an inspection being derived for a particular order or object in an order, or an operation within an order. So that's at the more precise level, all the way down to we just may want the user to be able to undertake an inspection at will directly against a functional occasional equipment and without having an order. And we support that too. So we have different responses, or different question types require a different control of the screen. And so we have created a number of screen variations so that the visual cues on the screen differ, or the values that you're being offered differ depending on the shape of the question. And some responses demand action. So in some cases, if you're, for example, doing condition grading and you answer that the asset is poor, then you might also want to trigger that the operator goes and creates a notification, or gathers information that can create a notification when it's processed in SAP. So, and more challenges, if you've got complex inspections that can take some effort to complete, then that can pose it at risk if it's just sitting on the device and the device is subject to damage or loss. So we take all the inspection data back to SAP every time you synchronize. And that allows you to be able to switch devices, or even switch personnel and have one person taking over the completion of inspection from another, for example, between shifts. Some customers wanted to pre-generate inspections so that they can track them. So to begin with, when we delivered BlueWorx, we had the determination of the inspection actually occurring on the device, and we still allow that as an option. Or you can switch it now over to have SAP, through a routine job, look at the orders that you have, look at the objects, look at the configuration for BlueWorx, and generate the inspection from within SAP. The next challenge is that if you have a look at a paper form, you'll often see a little bit more context around the instructions being given to an inspection, and in some occasions even diagrams to assist the operator in undertaking the inspection and assessing the criteria of it. In SAP plain text just doesn't cut that. So what we've done is we support that you can use HTML text, so that you can do rich text editing with headers and different fonts and colors and lists, and also include images in that as well. Then finally, some customers have personnel undertaking inspections using different languages, and I already touched upon this. So as I said, we allow you to maintain translations for all those text values and store that in your completed results. So let's have a look at some selected terms and concepts. This will just set the scene and so make sure that we're all talking the same language. So in BlueWorx, an inspection is a list of questions that you undertake against an asset, and generally within a work order, though it doesn't have to be. In an order, it can be optional or compulsory. Directly against an asset, it's always going to be optional, because an asset by itself is not an instruction to do work. And the inspection has one or more ordered question groups. So for example, an example of an inspection might be a truck weekly operator check. Within the inspection is a question group And that's just a collection of ordered questions that are logically grouped together just to help drive the operator through the inspection process. So in that truck weekly operator check, we may have a group there for vehicle engine bays. All the questions related to the vehicle engine bay will be in that group. And then next comes the question, and this is where the real work is done. And so that's what's offered to the inspector, and that's what they get to provide a response on. The responses can be optional or compulsory. So at an inspection level, it can be optional or compulsory, and then each individual question within an inspection can be optional or compulsory. So an example of that, and following from the top, is that we have the weekly operator check. They're looking in the vehicle engine bay, and they get told to check the oil level. Now, for some questions, they can be free text, and in other cases, you want to restrict the responses. And if you're answering a classification value, then that can come from allowed values from a SAP classification characteristic. But if you're just using a plain text response, or if you don't have a value list in your classification object, then you can use an answer group. And so an answer group is just a predefined series of responses to a question. You can use that repeatedly for lots of the traditional very good, good, fair, poor, very poor, conditional grading range, or whatever it is that you use in your industry. And having set it up once, you can just reuse that. And lastly, we have what we call a notification template. So when we put a response into either an answer group question or a list of values from a classification characteristic, we can, or you can, in terms of the inspection configuration, you can demand that on some values you either have to create a notification on the device or supply some text, and then that will be used in processing in SAP to create a notification based upon a predefined template that you've set up. So that comes down to the sophistication of how much you want to gather in terms of the notification, and the use cases of the complexity against the complexity. So in some cases you might want to drive the user to go off and fill out all the cause and fault codes and everything else, and in other cases you just want them to add a little bit more detail, and you'll create a notification basically for them using a notification template. Some industries, they like to use this. Some would just rather drive them to creating the notification on the device. So inspection rules. So within an inspection, we can use rules to control the behavior of the questions that are included in the inspection. So we can hide or show questions or make them compulsory. Inspection Viewer is actually an application that's delivered with BlueWorx. So you still see it as part of the normal application. It's just another tile. And from within the BlueWorx main application, if you're on an asset, for example, on the equipment or a functional location, or you're within the details of an inspection, if you have a connection back to SAP, then you can go into the inspection viewer and you can see all the previous inspections that have been done for this asset and the results of those. So if you're seeing something during the course of an inspection that causes you alarm, or that you want to understand whether others have seen this, then you can go and have a look at that. Comments template, I just explained before that we can use a notification template in order to, if you like, silently create a notification on processing within SAP. Well, a comments template is actually available in all long text fields throughout BlueWorx, and it can help you to gather in more information around a notification, or just in general in comments in your responses to just a normal question. So you assess something, you choose a value from a list, but you also want to record that some other observation or something else just to provide context. If it was really important, then you should obviously create a notification or some other mechanism to alert somebody. But the comments template just allows you to gather a little bit more richer information, or prompt to gather more information. And lastly, inspection photos. You can configure that the operator can take one or more photos for a question. And so those are captured and stored back in the SAP system, and you can see those from the inspection viewer application when you're reviewing questions at a detailed level. So let's have a look at the construction. Hopefully this will put some of those concepts into a little bit more context. So over on the right we have an example of an inspection screen on a mobile device. So from the top we see a description of the inspection. So 66 kV transformer is the inspection that's being undertaken. And then the next item down is that we see that it's for an equipment power transformer. So that's the asset being inspected. And the two get linked. In other words, this inspection gets linked to the power transformer through object configuration that the BlueWorx administrator sets up. Next bit down, there's the question group. So as I mentioned, this is just an easy way to collect questions in a logical manner. And within the question group, you can have one or more questions. So you can see that there's a number of questions within the 66 kV transformer group. And as I mentioned on the previous screen, we can use rules to turn on and off and make compulsory individual questions in the context of an inspection. So you may have, for example, an inspection where the same inspection might be undertaken if the equipment is operating or if it's been shut down, but it's only on shutdown that you have the ability to answer a certain series of questions, because you can't assess those things while the machine is operating. So you can use rules based upon a response right up front in the question to say, is the equipment operating? I'm going to hide all these questions. If it's not operating, I'm going to expose them and expect a response. So there's three different ways that we can connect inspections to either an order and asset, functional location equipment, or directly just to the equipment or functional location. The first group is that we specifically tie it to an order operation. So we have an order, we can configure it based upon the order type, the standard text key of the operation, the object type of the equipment or functional location, and a characteristic of the equipment or functional location, or a characteristic value. So we can use that in combination to dictate that this inspection applies. The use case there is that if you had a 6-monthly inspection and an annual inspection, then the order may be PMO3. It's always going to be a PMO3, so there's no way to distinguish between the two. The equipment is what it is. It doesn't change, so there's no way to distinguish it there. So the way that you would fire a 6-monthly inspection as opposed to a 12-monthly inspection is in using the standard text key for the operation. So that's a fine level of control, if you like, over the inspection that's being undertaken. So the next level down is just an order object inspection. And so in this case, we lose the standard key, but we have all those other controls in there. So for this order type, for this object type, and for this characteristic value, we can control what inspection is made available within the inspection list against the order objects, as opposed to the equipment or functional location that is set at the operation level in example 1. So less finite control. And the third option is that, for lack of a better term, we might call these ad hoc inspections, where you are controlling from an equipment or functional location record in BlueWorx that you can undertake an inspection based upon the equipment or functional location's object type and or a characteristic value. So for example, in an operation sense, if you had to do a vehicle pre-start check before you used a vehicle from the pool, you wouldn't have a work order necessarily to do that. You would be expected to undertake an inspection. So you could find the equipment on BlueWorx and then just go and undertake an ad hoc inspection. So a little bit further on the question response types. So what a user sees when they're answering a question on the screen, the main value that they respond to is controlled by a question response type. And these are all the different types that we've come up so far. And we have customers that ask us for more, and so we have added to the list over time. But this is where we're at the moment. The yes/no is pretty simple to understand, as is the numeric and string values. The single value condition is the standard very good to good down to low list of questions. Single value date, once again, easy to understand. Latitude, longitude, so that's normally filled in using the GPS values from the device. It's automatically filled in, and so that is giving you a point. A latitude longitude pair is giving you 2 points, so it might be a start or a stop response. A value and latitude longitude is you're taking a location and you're also giving a value at that location. Distance and latitude longitude, so that's a special one that we've done for some linear assets where a customer needed to take a series of distance measures and also record the latitude and longitude of the start of those distances. Delta value between two, put two values in, and the response value is the difference between them. Multiple responses, you can go around, for example, and take the pressure on truck tyres if you didn't have individual measurement points for them, and just record them as a series of responses. It's not going to process anything in SAP in this case, but it does allow you to record the detailed results back in SAP. And lastly, a signature block where you can put your name, position in, and then sign the screen. That's particularly useful where you're dealing with external personnel. So having gathered the response, we have different things that we can do with it back in SAP. So the first is to create a measurement document against a point for the functional location or equipment that's being inspected. And the next one is characteristic update for the equipment or functional location. Similarly, for a core record or master data field in the equipment or functional location, and then the user status update. So changing an equipment, for example, you might shut it down or condemn it, or you might change it to not operative, depending on your use cases. And the last one is to take no transactional processing or master data update action in SAP, but just record the response to the question. So this actually gets used quite a lot by customers because there's only so many things you can measure in terms of measurement documents or the value of those, but especially around regulatory things, you want to record that you made an assessment based upon specific criteria without necessarily having to have a place for it to sit back in SAP.
That concludes this introduction to inspections. In other videos, we'll demonstrate a number of inspections and explain how these are configured using BlueWorx administration. If you're looking for more information online, then that's accessible through the BlueWorx product support site. You can also download our sample application for Apple and Android and try BlueWorx out for yourself. If you want to know more about anything you've seen, then please get in contact with either Carl or I. We'd be happy to answer any queries you have or organise a demonstration for you. Thank you for your time.